The smell of burnt coffee clung to the boardroom air. I tasted copper in my mouth, an aftertaste of humiliation. Eliza's voice cut like a blade, 60% pay cut or walk out. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed calm. I watched her lips move, watched the others stare. Silence held the room like a vice, a chill creeping up my spine. I didn't flinch. I just breathed slow, steady. Where are you listening from? Hit subscribe and join me on this journey of betrayal and quiet revenge. I drove home that night with my pulse drumming in my ears. The taste of cold sweat stuck to my tongue. Charleston's cobblestone streets glistened under the street lamps, but all I could see were her eyes as she said those words. I'd given Riven Group 12 years of my life, late nights, early mornings, weekends blurred into deadlines. And now, this. The betrayal tasted like old bourbon, bitter sharp, burning all the way down. I didn't slam the door when I got home. I moved quietly through the rooms, letting the silence wrap around me like a worn blanket. Eliza's perfume still lingered in the hallway, a ghost of something sweet that had long since turned sour. I poured a drink and stared at the family photos on the wall. Eliza smiling beside me, our hands clasped at some gala, back when everything felt possible. I could almost hear the music of that night, the laughter, the way she leaned into me, like we were one. But that was a lifetime ago. Now I saw the cold calculation in her eyes, the way she'd weighed me on a balance sheet and decided I was worth less. Clark Windsor, my oldest friend, the man I trusted with everything, nodding along as she cut me down. I remembered the first time we shook hands in a cramped office above the river, two men with nothing but ambition and a dream. Clark had stood by me when no one else would, or so I thought. I closed my eyes and let the anger settle. Not a fire, no. A glacier, slow and unstoppable, grinding away at everything in its path. The next morning I woke early and walked down to the Riverwalk Cafe. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted in the air, but my stomach turned at the thought of food. I needed to clear my head to find the quiet in the chaos. The river was calm that morning, a mirror of the sky still and endless. I watched the gulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp against the hush of dawn. I thought about Eliza's words again, how final they'd sounded. But I knew better. I'd built Riven from the ground up, the systems, the client trust, the web of relationships that kept the company afloat. She might control the boardroom, but she didn't control what really mattered. I sipped my coffee and let the bitterness wake me up. I thought of Lucas, our son, sleeping in his room, unaware that his father was being dismantled piece by piece. I wouldn't let him see me broken. I wouldn't let anyone see that. Back at the house, I opened my laptop and started going through my files. Every proposal, every contract, proof of the value I'd brought, the value they couldn't erase with a single meeting. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. I was gathering strength. I was remembering who I was before Eliza's cold smile, before Clark's betrayal. A man who knew how to build, how to lead, how to rise when everyone else thought he'd fallen. The day stretched out in front of me, a blank page. I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The phone buzzed, a text from Clark. Let's talk, don't do anything rash. I stared at the words, felt the weight of them. Too late. The river outside my window flowed on calm on the surface, deep and dangerous beneath. I took a breath and turned back to my files. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next day, the air at Riven felt sharp as broken glass. I walked through the lobby, my footsteps echoing off marble floors. People glanced up from their screens, eyes flicking away fast like I was a ghost. Eliza's office door was open when I passed. She didn't look up, didn't smile. She just kept tapping at her keyboard as if I'd already disappeared. I made my way to my office, the one with the view of the river, the one I'd earned with years of deals and long nights. My nameplate still gleamed on the door, but it felt like a lie. Inside, the air smelled stale, like old coffee and secrets. I sat down and stared at the phone on my desk. It didn't ring. It wouldn't. I knew that now. Clark knocked on the door an hour later. He didn't wait for me to say a come in. He just stepped inside, all easy smiles and fake concern. Grant, we're all under pressure here, he said, like he hadn't been the one to sell me out. I didn't answer. I watched the way his hand hovered over the back of the chair, like he wasn't sure if he should sit. Finally, he did. I know how this looks, he said, his voice soft, like he thought I was fragile. But you have to see the bigger picture. I leaned back. Let him keep talking. You've been here a long time, Grant. Things change. We're streamlining, moving fast. Eliza's just adapting. I could smell his cologne, the same brand he'd worn for years, crisp, clean, expensive. It turned my stomach. You don't have to do this, he said, dropping his voice. You don't have to make this hard on yourself. I almost laughed. I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward, my elbows on the desk. You think this is hard on me, Clark? He blinked just once. You think you're the only one who's been planning? For a moment, his mask slipped, a flicker of doubt in those polished eyes. I let the silence stretch out, let him feel it. Then I stood. You can tell Eliza whatever you want, I said, my voice steady. But this isn't over. He opened his mouth to say something, but I was already walking past him out the door. The hallway felt colder somehow, the fluorescent lights too bright, like they were burning away every lie I'd swallowed. I went to the records room, a windowless space that smelled like paper and dust. I pulled files, old contracts, notes from client meetings, the kind of details that don't live in spreadsheets. Each page was a piece of me, proof that I'd built something real. Proof they couldn't just erase. As I worked, I felt the weight in my chest start to shift like a boulder rolling off a cliff. I wasn't angry, not in the way they expected. I was clear, focused. I knew what I had to do. At lunch, I didn't go to the cafeteria. I walked down to the river instead, stood on the old iron bridge, watching the water slide past. The wind smelled of salt and diesel, the tang of the harbor, mixing with the sweetness of spring. I closed my eyes and let it fill my lungs. Somewhere in that river, I thought, was the strength to start again. I would find it. Back at my office, I found a note on my desk. Eliza's handwriting, sharp and precise. Meet me in conference room C at 3. No signature, no explanation. I crumpled it in my hand, felt the paper crackle like old leaves. At 3 sharp, I walked in. Eliza was there already, Clark beside her, arms crossed. The room smelled of stale coffee and tension. She didn't look up right away, just kept her eyes on the laptop in front of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm. Grant, we need to be practical here. I said nothing. She looked up, her eyes cold and bright. Your compensation package is unsustainable, she said. Your role isn't aligned with our new direction? She leaned back as if that settled it. I felt my hands clench at my sides. Clark shifted, cleared his throat. Grant, we can offer you a consulting title, part-time, flexible, I cut him off. You mean a severance package? Eliza's lips pressed together. She closed the laptop with a soft click. You've always been a stabilizer, Grant. But we're moving forward. You can either take the package or make this harder than it needs to be. I let the silence hang. The only sound was the faint hum of the AC, a cold breath against my neck. Then I smiled. Not wide, just enough for her to see it. I'll need 24 hours, I said, my voice, even like I was talking about the weather. Eliza looked surprised. Clark looked relieved. I turned and walked out without another word. In the hallway, my heart thundered in my chest, but I kept my shoulders straight. The world outside felt bigger than it had in days, the river gleaming silver in the distance, the smell of fresh rain drifting in through the lobby doors. 24 hours, that's all I asked for. It was all I needed. I drove home with the windows down, the air, cool and damp from a late spring rain. The scent of wet pavement and magnolia blooms filled the truck, a sweet relief from the staleness of that boardroom. I parked by the old oak tree in the yard, the one Lucas used to climb. The house looked the same, white siding, black shutters, but it felt like a stranger waiting to greet me. Inside, the quiet pressed in on me. I set my keys down, poured a glass of water, watched the ripples settle in the glass. I could feel the weight of the day in my shoulders, like I'd been carrying a mountain too long. I walked upstairs to Lucas's room, his soccer cleats still by the door, the faint smell of sweat and grass. He was at his mom's tonight, Eliza's house now. I ran my hand along the doorframe, felt the smooth paint under my fingertips. He didn't know. He couldn't. Downstairs, I opened the cabinet where I kept my files. I pulled out folders, client lists, the quiet work I'd done in the shadows for years. Each page was a thread in the web I'd spun, a web Eliza didn't even know existed. I spread them out on the kitchen table, the paper cool and crisp under my hands. I thought of the way Eliza had looked at me, like I was an obstacle to be removed. I thought of Clark's voice, slick with false concern. They thought I'd take the deal, fade away like an old ghost. But they didn't know me. I didn't want revenge, not the kind that leaves you bitter and hollow. I wanted something simpler, the truth and the freedom that comes with it. The next morning I dressed carefully. A dark jacket, polished shoes, a tie I hadn't worn in years. I wanted them to see me one last time, not as a man defeated, but as a man choosing his own ending. I drove to the diner by the river, the one with chipped mugs and burnt coffee that somehow still tasted like home. Jared, an old friend from my early days in tech, sat in the corner booth. His hair was grayer now, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He'd reached out weeks ago, said his company had room for someone who knew how to build trust. I sat across from him, the vinyl seat sticking to my back in the morning heat. We didn't talk about titles or salaries. We talked about values, about the kind of work that matters. By the time I left, I felt lighter, like I'd finally put down something I'd been carrying for too long. I drove to Riven one last time, the weight in my chest replaced by something steady and calm. As I stepped through the glass doors, I realized this was no longer my fight. I walked the hall, slow each step, a quiet goodbye. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint tang of printer ink. Eliza's office door stood open, sunlight spilling across her polished desk. She looked up when I stepped in. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then she closed her laptop, folded her hands, her eyes cold and bright. "Have you made a decision?" she asked. I met her gaze. "I have." I placed the envelope on her desk, the paper heavy in the still air. She didn't reach for it. She just stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Don't do this, Grant," she said softly. Her voice almost kind, but I heard the edge beneath. I stayed silent. Outside the window, the river glinted in the sun, the slow, endless current. Eliza's lips tightened. "You're making a mistake," she said. I smiled, small and tired. "No, Eliza, I'm making a choice." I turned and walked out, my footsteps echoing down the hall. No one stopped me. No one spoke. I reached the elevator, pressed the button, felt the soft vibration as the doors opened. As I stepped inside, I took one last look at the glass walls, the quiet offices, the company we'd built together. Then I let the doors slide shut. I walked out of that building with my head held high, the sun warm on my face, the smell of the river in the breeze. 24 hours. That's all I'd asked for. It was enough. The next morning, the diner smelled of bacon and strong coffee, the clatter of plates and quiet conversations. I took my usual seat by the window, watching the river roll past, calm and steady. Jared slid into the booth across from me, his grin wide, his eyes bright with questions. "You ready to talk?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm done with Riven," I said, my voice low, calm. "I've got no interest in taking them down, but I won't let them bury me either." Jared leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table. "You've always been the quiet one, the one who listened more than he spoke. People trust that." I felt the truth of it in my bones. The quiet work, the late nights, the careful choices. That's what they had never understood. I didn't need to steal clients. I didn't need to burn bridges. I just needed to let people know I was free. Jared pulled out a folder thick with possibility. "Senior strategist," he said. "Full autonomy. You decide how deep you want to go." I took it, felt the weight of the paper, the promise in every line. My hands didn't shake. I'd earned this. I met his eyes. "Let's do it." The words felt good, solid, final. We shook hands, the deal sealed without a single contract. That was how it worked, trust not signatures. As I left the diner, the sun broke through the clouds, warm and clean. I drove back to the river, parked at the overlook, where the water meets the harbor. The smell of salt and pine filled the air. I thought of Lucas, of the kind of man I wanted him to see in me. Not someone who broke under pressure, someone who stood tall. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, names of clients who'd trusted me for years. I didn't call them. I didn't need to. They'd heard the whispers. They'd come. Because loyalty isn't something you can fake. And once it's earned, it doesn't vanish in a single meeting. Back at home, I packed up my files, the notes, the records of every deal I'd made. I left the awards on the shelf, the glass trophies gathering dust. They didn't matter anymore. I was done with Eliza's empire. Done with Clark's silent nods. I had something better, my name. My work, my word. I could feel it in the quiet of that room, the steady pulse in my chest. Not revenge, not anger, but a calm, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need to shout. I locked the door behind me, stepped into the morning light and didn't look back. I met Eliza one final time at the Riverwalk Cafe on a gray morning. The air smelled of rain and old coffee, the kind of day that soaks into your bones. She sat at a corner table, her back straight, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She didn't look up when I walked in, just stared at the river outside its slow, endless current. I took the seat across from her, my coat still damp from the drizzle. For a moment we sat in silence. The only sounds were the clink of dishes, the quiet hum of voices around us. Finally she spoke. "You've made your choice then." Her voice was soft, but her eyes were hard. I nodded. "You never saw me." I said, my voice low, calm. "You only saw what you wanted." She flinched just slightly, and I knew the words had landed. I pulled out the USB drive, set it on the table between us. Her eyes flicked down, then back up to meet mine. "What is this?" she asked. I leaned forward, felt the weight of every late night, every quiet compromise. "Proof," I said. "Proof of what you tried to bury." She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. She knew. "You think this will save you?" she whispered, her voice brittle. I shook my head. "I don't need saving. I need you to see me just this once, the man you underestimated, the man who won't bend anymore." She closed her eyes, took a long breath. When she opened them, the cold certainty was gone, replaced by something softer, something almost like regret. "You've always been stronger than I thought," she said, and for a moment I believed her. But I didn't need her belief. I stood the chair, scraping the floor, the sound sharp in the hush of that cafe. "Goodbye, Eliza," I said. She didn't answer. Outside, the river rolled on its surface, broken by the first drops of rain. I stepped into the wet air, the smell of earth and water grounding me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel loss. I felt something clean, something that tasted like freedom. As I walked away, I knew she would spin her story, try to patch the cracks in her kingdom. But the truth had a way of finding the light, and I was done living in her shadow. A year later, I sit by the river again, the same stretch of water that's seen everything. The sun slides low, turning the current to molten gold. I watch it move steady and sure, like the quiet power I carry inside me now. My office is smaller these days, but the work feels bigger. Jared's team trusts me, and I trust them. No titles, no hollow promises, just real work built on real trust. I don't miss the glass walls of Riven, the echo of voices that never listened. I don't miss Eliza's sharp words or Clark's polite betrayals. I don't think about them much at all. When I do, it's just a memory, a lesson in how easy it is to forget what matters. Lucas visits every other weekend, his laughter filling the small house I rent by the river. He sees me now, not the man who stayed quiet to keep the peace, but the man who stood up, who chose his own path. At night, I walk the river walk, the scent of salt and wood smoke in the air. I think about how far I've come and how far I still want to go. I've learned something in the quiet of these days. Loyalty isn't about staying silent. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to walk away. It's about choosing yourself not out of pride, but out of respect for what you've built and what you deserve. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for apologies that won't come. I'm just here, alive, clear and ready for whatever comes next. I ask you now, where are you listening from? And have you ever let someone else decide your worth? Join me here. Hit subscribe and let's find that quiet strength together.